Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell. In today's video, we're going to look at the dot point in our study design that states we need to know the role of the key participants in the workplace. Now, it lists specific participants, and many of those participants are heavily involved in an area in a business called workplace relations. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to really come at this from a workplace relations point of view and look at the role of each of the key participants that are listed in our study design. So in order to do that, we really need to know, well, what is workplace relations? So when we refer to workplace relations, we're talking about the relationship and the communication between employees and their employer, but particularly around areas around wages, employment conditions, and workplace disputes. So they're the kind of things that we're going to be talking about and looking at the key role of each of the participants in our study design. So the goal with workplace relations is to have a really positive workplace relations so that employees are satisfied with their wages, with their employment conditions, but also so that the business is productive and can remain competitive and also profitable. And therefore, any disputes that arise within a business, because things don't always happen the way they should. Sometimes there will be disputes that happen within a business, and if that does happen, having positive workplace relations will ensure that first of all, disputes are minimised, but if a dispute does arise, that it's resolved fairly and consistently. So as I mentioned, we need to look at the role of the key participants when dealing with workplace relations, and these are the ones that are listed in our study design that we're going to go through individually. Now, as we know, the employees are those that work within the business, and really their role is to work towards the achievement of business objectives. That's what they're employed to do. However, in regards to workplace relations issues, employees can be involved in a number of different things. So first of all, they might be involved in the negotiation of new agreements. Now, that could be directly, where they're directly involved in the negotiation of their own wages and conditions through an individual contract, which we'll get to in a later video. Or they may be involved in at least putting forward their ideas on what they want in an agreement in terms of the wages and conditions that they would prefer in there. They also would be voting on a new agreement. So once a business has actually put forward an agreement and said to the employees, well, this is what we're offering, then they would vote yes or no on that particular agreement. It could be that if negotiations are breaking down, they may be involved in taking industrial action if required. So things like going on strike to try and express their importance to the employer about or the importance of the employees to the employer, to try and persuade them to come to the negotiation table and increase their wages or conditions. And also, they're really there to carry out their responsibilities. So once an agreement has been set, the responsibility of the employees is actually to carry out the work that's stipulated in that agreement. So the next participant is the human resource manager, who's responsible for managing the relationship between the employees and the business. But more specifically in terms of workplace relations, well, what they will often do is represent the employer in negotiation of new wage agreements. So when the business or the employees are looking for a new wage agreement, so their past one has expired and they're looking for new wages and conditions, well, the human resource manager will normally represent the employer. Even though they are an employee themselves, they will normally represent the employer in those negotiations. They're also going to participate in the resolution of disputes. So as I mentioned before, things don't always go along really well, and sometimes there'll be a dispute between employees or between an employee and the business or a supervisor. And so the human resource manager can help or participate in the resolution of that dispute to try and resolve the dispute and get people back to work, being productive. Also, once an agreement, so a new wage agreement, has been decided upon and approved, it will begin. And so it's the job of the human resource manager to actually implement that agreement. So that may include training managers and supervisors on any new conditions that have been put in place, and also putting in higher wages by the due date that they're expected to be in, all those kind of things. So they're actually implementing the agreement. And also they're there to liaise with the employer associations and unions and the Fair Work Commission about any legislation changes or any other workplace relations issues that may be occurring within the business. Now, the unions are organisations that actually represent and offer advice to employees in regards to workplace relations issues. So the unions are specialists in workplace relations. That's what they deal with day in, day out. And so the employees aren't necessarily that. So what they can often do is get the union to represent them in those particular scenarios. So we spoke before about the human resource manager and the employees and how they can negotiate new wage agreements together, or if there's a dispute, they can deal with it together. But sometimes the employees won't feel comfortable doing that in terms of they don't have the skills or the knowledge about workplace relations laws and those types of things. So they may get the union to represent them on their and negotiate on their behalf. And therefore the human resource manager may be negotiating with the union and the union is negotiating on behalf of the employees. So part of their role of a union is to negotiate new wage agreements on behalf of employees, because they are there to represent the employees and get the best deal for the employees. They also offer advice around workplace relations issues. That could be during the term of their agreement, or offering advice during the term of a negotiation or a dispute or anything like that. They offer support and can also represent employees again during times of dispute. So it could be simply offering advice during times of a dispute, or actually getting the union to represent the employees in terms of a dispute, and that could be around unfair dismissal or any other type of dispute. Also, the union will often organise industrial action. So if the negotiation of a new agreement is breaking down and things aren't going that well, they may organise industrial action such as a strike to get the employees to say, let's show our importance to the employer, to try and persuade them to come to the party about what we want in a new wage agreement. Now, the employer associations are very similar to the union. Employer associations are organisations that represent and offer advice around workplace relations issues. The difference is that they do it for the employers and not the employees. So they represent or offer advice for the employers. So in terms of workplace relations issues, some of their roles include negotiating new wage agreements. So similar to the employees, so the union can represent the employees. Here, the employer association can represent the employers in those particular negotiations, or at least offer advice in those particular negotiations. Also, they will be notifying and assisting employers with changes in legislation. So any workplace relations changes, they make sure that the business is well prepared for those changes and help implementing any policies or procedures that they need to implement to ensure that they're abiding by any changes in law. Also, the employer association can advise or represent employers in workplace disputes. Again, similar to the way that a union represents employees during disputes, the employer association can advise or represent the employers during a workplace dispute, because again, they are workplace relations specialists, but looking at it from the perspective of the employer. The final participant in our study design is the Fair Work Commission, and they are Australia's independent workplace tribunal. So they're there to oversee all of workplace relations to ensure that both employers and employees are dealt with fairly, so that the businesses can remain competitive and productive, and also so that employees are dealt with fairly and reasonably and receive wages and conditions that helps maintain their standard of living. So in terms of their role, they've got a really large role with workplace relations, obviously, but part of the specific things that you can look at is things like providing a safety net of minimum wages and conditions for all employees. So they set the minimum wage, the minimum conditions, and also the minimum conditions and wages for each particular industry, so that employees' standard of living is maintained. And also they hear unfair and unlawful dismissal. So if an employee feels like they've been dismissed unfairly, then they can take it to the Fair Work Commission to have a hearing, and they'll act independently and decide whether it was unfair or not. They regularly monitor industrial action, so things like strikes and lockouts, and make sure that that isn't impacting the economy and that it's dealt with fairly. So they approve or disapprove of that when employees or employers actually submit to them that they want to take industrial action. And also they hear and investigate bullying and harassment claims. They also approve workplace agreements. So throughout this video, we've spoken about the negotiation of wage agreements and things like that, which we'll get to in a later video, which will help you understand those agreements. But once it has been agreed upon, it goes to the Fair Work Commission, and they look over it and approve it or disapprove it. So they'll look at things like that the employees would be better off overall than they would be on the industry award, and also if there's no industry award, that they're better off overall than on the minimum wage and national employment standards, which again we'll get to in a later video. So they approve workplace agreements before they're actually put into action. And also they assist in resolving workplace disputes. So if a dispute can't be resolved within the workplace, well, the Fair Work Commission can be called upon to go through mediation, conciliation and arbitration. And again, we'll get to those particular workplace dispute procedures within a future video. So they've got a really large role, the Fair Work Commission. And really, again, they're there to oversee, to ensure that workplace relations is done fairly for both the employer and the employees. But it's important to note that they are independent. They are not there looking out for the best for the employer or the employer. They are an independent tribunal to see that things are done fairly. So just to recap, workplace relations refers to the relationship between the communication shared between employees and their employer, but especially around things or issues surrounding wages, employment conditions and workplace disputes. And the 5 key participants that we went through there, it's just important that you know their role in workplace relations or within the workplace. So if we go back to our little chart there, remember that this is all about what's happening within the workplace between the employees and the employer. So looking around things like wages, disputes, working conditions, and the negotiation of contracts, that can be all done at workplace level. However, sometimes either the business or the employees don't have the experience or the knowledge in terms of workplace relations, and they may ask for advice or get representation from either their employer association for the employers or the union for the employees. And where it's all necessary, the Fair Work Commission sits above all of that and to ensure that everything is done fairly and reasonably. And if called upon, they act as the independent tribunal to decide things like wages and conditions, or through mediation, conciliation, and arbitration, or to resolve any dispute that is occurring within the workplace. So for questions, activities, and to find out more about our Unit 4 and exam preparation lectures, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.